Has the market changed its mind about what the Fed may do next?
Strongly committed to bringing inflation back down to our 2% goal. We have both the tools that we need and the resolve it will take to restore price stability on behalf of American families and businesses. Price stability is the responsibility of the Federal Reserve and serves as the bedrock of our economy.
Hello, I'm Christopher Crystal with Financial Stockholm. Today is October 3rd, 2022, and these are the views that we see happening in the Swedish market. We've had a lot of the earnings out, and we don't have a lot of Swedish press talking about Sweden. We do have a lot going on. However, the Swedish press is fairly lazy and is focused more on external factors than internal factors within Sweden. The main focus is about the Fed rate hikes and what's happening, and 75 basis points, is this too high? Will this slow the economy? Is it bad for the market? We've seen the market reactions, and really I think anybody in Sweden who's writing about this is just really being lazy, because you've had the White House telling you that the economy is kicking butt. You've seen the unemployment figures. So if you believe the White House and you look at the figures, you would say, okay, great, they need to raise rates because the economy is overheating, if you go along with the Fed kind of ideology. And then when you look at the inflation levels, which are well over 8%, you would have to say to yourself, well, they have a target of 2, so they need to raise rates to curtail inflation. Then if you look at the Doomsday economists who are out there saying, well, no, you need to go with 50 basis points, it's going to be too much, it's going to slow the economy, then they obviously don't believe the White House comments about a strong economy. So there's an issue there. And if you look at the Fed notes and you look at how the Fed's been talking, it's been talking about higher rates, 75 basis point moves. And if you look at an economist who used to be a Secretary of Treasury, who is now a teacher at Harvard, you would understand, okay, the Fed has clearly missed the inflation. They use different labels for it. We're in a recession. And although this hurts, we have to do something to get things back on track. And if you look at how he got to work with Paul Volcker, who was a mastermind economist and had saved the United States economy not once, but twice, in my lifetime, you would say, okay, he's probably going to recommend following that same sort of pattern. So saying it was a surprise would be dishonest or just lazy. And to not understand that is just, people not doing their work. But if you put it in the perspective of, if you have a target of 2% and you're coming in around over 8%, and you go to your boss and say, do I get a bonus for missing my target by that much, by 3-fold, by 4-fold what my target was? Your boss might tell you you're losing your job, or your boss might tell you you're no longer going to be in that position. So if you fail in your KPIs, you get punished. But if the Fed is failing on their KPIs, well, the way it happens is the market gets punished or rewarded. And so that would be really kind of what's happening in Sweden, that they're looking more at external factors. We do have about 10 million people here, and there's a lot of businesses, and we could talk about the small business cycle and how that's hurting. And we did have our Swedish finance minister talking about the state of the economy is in bad shape. We do see a potential loss of craftsman industries here in Sweden, and we do see that the electricity prices have been much higher, and there is a statement out there saying October was the lowest or lower. And I'll just give you an example. I cut my electricity production by 45%, okay? And then my bill went down by still around 50%, okay? Then in this month of cheaper prices, I cut that first reduction by another 45% of electricity consumption. My bill was still 50% of the previous month. So if the prices were lower, shouldn't I have had a lower than 50% decrease in my price? And that didn't occur. So you're running into the issue already very quickly as the campaigning starts immediately for the next cycle, where Swedish politicians are not meeting the goals that they stated. And Now, this was considered a big shift here in Sweden when we had the Sverigedemokraterna being the second largest party, and you had the third largest party, the Moderaterna by vote, becoming the one that gets the mandates, and you have the Social Democrats being still the largest party. But with exception to the Sverigedemokraterna, you did see losses in the other parties. You saw a lot of shifting around and a lot of movement. And so what people are failing to do is really kind of obey reality. They want to attach things to theory. And what this will mean for the Swedish economy and the governance here in Sweden will be seen. But if you look at how Denmark shifted, it could mean another dramatic shift in the near term for the Swedish economy and the voting. And you have this episode on our local TV discussing politicians and taking full advantage of the laws according to what the Riksdag says that they can do for food supplementation or for transportation supplementation, where they shouldn't be held accountable for it. It should go to the taxpayer, and the taxpayer gets to pay for the transportation between their residence and their governance place, or the food that they have to eat while they're doing this. And they covered not all parties, but they covered the socialists, Social Democrats, they covered the Moderaterna, and they covered the Sverigedemokraterna. And they showed that all three parties are taking full advantage of this. And they also showed that all three parties were cheating on where they're filing as a tax resident. And this would be something that would be more interesting for the Swedish consumer to understand how their government is or is not working for them. And so this would have been something that would be a little more interesting. However, they shy away from it. Also, I would say is that Greta Thunberg has come out in Telegram as saying, tear down the capitalist system. She's not going to go to the COP27 in Egypt, and because she doesn't really see it as a worthwhile venture for herself. And she wants to change our system from capitalism over to communism. And I find that a little odd because on ESG value, if you look at where communism's in place and has been employed, you see vast environmental destruction. And you see it on a very clear stance where possibly it cannot be reverted. China, for instance, used to have freshwater dolphins like you still have in the Amazon. They're gone now. You've seen things like in the former Soviet states, like the Aral Sea and the Caspian Sea, and the dramatic reductions there due to environmental destruction. And so it's a little odd that you see Greta Thunberg, who is an avowed environmentalist, evoking or espousing the belief that a system that actively destroys the environment would be the system to use. Now, you can argue capitalism destroys as well, and that's why we've implemented ESG. So it's a little odd that you would kind of go for a system that destroys, as opposed to saying, okay, we've been trying to work on a system to change it so it would be better and so we can all survive together. But none of these stories really make it to the Swedish press. And so I think when they're looking at the US politics, they're enamored of what's happening in the United States. I think probably the best way to look at it is if you have the House going red, okay, they're the ones who enact the power of impeachment. They're the sole unit with that ability. The Senate, if they go red, would be able to convict on impeachment, okay? If the Senate would not have the ability to do that, then you don't have to worry. Then Biden doesn't get impeached, just like Donald Trump was impeached but not convicted. So Biden would remain in office, and then you would have a lame duck period. But if you get enough in the House and you get enough in the Senate, you will see impeachment, and then you may see the removal of Biden, and you may see the removal of Kamala Harris. And then you would have the question of who is the Speaker of the House, and does the Speaker of the House, is it going to be Kevin McCarthy, or would it be somebody else? And you've seen theories about how to mold this so it could be somebody who a lot of people don't like, would come in as the Speaker of the House. And then you have the 47th president. And if you look at now what's happening in the world, in the US politics, We've seen a character, an individual named Tulsi Gabbard. She was eliminated from the political race as presidential candidate due to what Michael Bloomberg did in Samoa. He spent $10 million on election money to campaign in Samoa and get her off the ballot. So she couldn't beat Bernie or she couldn't beat Biden because she had a lot of appeal to Republicans. She had a very strong appeal to Democrat, but she was removed from the ballot process through Michael Bloomberg's campaigning in Samoa. So she's now switched out of the Democrat Party. She hasn't announced who she's going to run for or run as in the future, nor has she made any campaign promises, but she's making all the talk circuits and all the Republican channels. All the conservative channels have had her. And so she's a very strong candidate to become a vice presidential candidate for the Republican Party in the next cycle. And she's a very strong candidate. Some might even say, well, she should run for president, but I think she is going to be what would be a Democrat or a Republican vice president, and she would probably run with DeSantis. And then you will probably see somebody like a Gavin Newsom and Michelle Obama being put out there as the presidential and Newsom as the vice presidential. But if you're looking for a red wave, obviously then the sectors that are going to be favored would be things like oil. Pharmaceutical won't have the same amount of strength that it's had. You will see changes in some of the green approach. You would see the technology sector getting some strength and some weakness due to censorship and First Amendment. And but that would be if you're going to bet on a red wave. If you're going to bet on that very little changes because politics is local and politics is always populism, then you could have a non-event. You may see a change in the House, which wouldn't be enough to change any sort of presidential term. And you may see a evening out in the Senate. And again, not enough to change the presidential term. So depending on which viewpoint you'd want to go for. And then, of course, you would want to look at the continued surge in the pharmaceuticals. You would want to look away from the oils. They'll still make money. And if you want to play the oils, you could look at the Syntax or the Syn ETFs. You could go with all of those to get a stronger performance, because if you're not playing by the quote unquote ESG rules, then you would see a benefit in those. And there's but that would be the way to look at it. And that's how the Swedish press is looking at it, without going into deeper detail on how the results of the election will turn. So we have mostly a focus on the US, and I think that's what the Swedish investor would do, is be looking at the US equities as a play. Even though Norway did raise rates slightly, and they're also in the rate hike camp, it's an indication that we will likely see more rate hikes here in Europe. We have inflation out of control at around 11%, and we don't have a viable energy plan in place to correct things in the short term. So that's what we have from Stockholm and the Nordics, and I'll wish you happy investing and a good rest of the day. Okay, thank you very much.